2024 has been one heck of a year for whiskey, and I want to tell you about my favorite bottlings from this past year. My number one is in my glass right now. My name is Matt. This is Whiskey on the West Coast. And considering which of the whiskeys I've had this year were the best of 2024, I've tried to set up a few rules to help me in constructing this list. And those rules are no independent bottlings or single casks. They're just too hard for people to find and too market specific. I might do a separate video later that highlights those, but for now, we're going to keep them off the list. I've also done a separate top 5 Canadian whiskeys of 2024 list, and if you find that video interesting, go ahead and check that video out at the end of this one. Finally, I've tried to keep it to whiskeys I actually own myself, and I've largely accomplished this with 9 of the 11 whiskeys I'm going to talk to you about actually being ones I own at this time. We're kicking off the list with best value. Now, last year's best value winner was this Glengyle 13-year-old Speyside Single Malt Scotch Whisky. That's a whiskey that, if you're lucky enough to be in Canada and have access to the Albertan market, it runs on sale for about $50 Canadian or otherwise $35 American equivalent, which is an absolutely measly sum of money to pay for such an excellent single malt Scotch whiskey. And even though I don't actually own a bottle of the whiskey I'm picking as the best value of 2024, I have enjoyed multiple drams of it this year thanks to people who've given me samples, and thank you guys, you know who you are. It really is a fantastic whiskey, and it's a deal that just could not be ignored. That was available in Alberta and still is largely. And the winner this year is the Glengyle 17-year-old Speyside Single Malt Whiskey. You can tell the reason why I had to bring out the Glengyle 13 for this one. This is a whiskey that's typically around $200 to $210 Canadian, and yet it went on sale for $105 to $120 Canadian. At $105 Canadian, you're paying $72 US for anyone who's in an outside market for a rich, oily, dirty, spicy, sweet, yet earthy dram. It's really one of the best all-rounder whiskeys out there. And I mean, that's an incredible value. That is the best value of 2024, hands down. I don't think anything is beating that. And if you're looking for a bottle still, I know you can get a bottle for $120 Canadian at Kensington Wine Market. So if you have access to the Albertan market, maybe check there. Next up on the list is the category of best special release. And if you watched my Christmas list, you would have seen this whiskey mentioned there. And that's because for the Christmas list, I wanted to mention whiskeys that were really, really good. And this was one of my favorites of the entire year. And so this whiskey was bottled for the Glengyle Festival of 2024. And it is the Laphroaig Carchus 2024 10-year-old cask favorites release. This is a Carchus release that is inspired by two popular former Carchus releases, the 2019's Triplewood and the 2021 Pedro Jimenez release. The cask makeup of this is ex-bourbon barrels, quarter casks, and finishing in Pedro Jimenez sherry casks, bottled at 52.4% ABV, which is not cask strength. If you ever wondered, these releases of the Carchus, the last 2 digits of the actual alcohol percentage indicate the year it was released for the Glengyle. In this case, 52.4% ABV. It was bottled for 2024. Honestly, this year's Carchus is, in my opinion, the best of the last 5 years, and it's been really cool to see an age statement return to the Carchus releases with this 10-year age on this one. I think it's a fantastic whiskey, and I absolutely had to go get a backup. The Laphroaig Carchus is the best special release whiskey of the year. Now we're going to cover the best release from a new distillery in 2024, and it's been really cool to see the emergence of some top quality new distilleries really disrupting the status quo of Scotch whiskey. Now, I'm a big fan, as you guys probably know, of Ardnamurchan, Toravaig, Holyrood, amongst others in this new distillery lineup. However, my pick is a whiskey that I eagerly anticipated all year and finally got to get a bottle near the end of 2024. It's from a distillery that I happened to actually visit when I visited Islay back in 2023, and that probably gives away exactly what my pick was. So I'll get right to it. It's the Ardnahoe inaugural 5-year-old Islay Single Malt Scotch Whisky. This inaugural whiskey release from Ardnahoe was absolutely worth the wait. It's a bloody gorgeous introduction to Ardnahoe. The peat comes off as much more mature than it actually is at 5 years of age. It's barbecue grilled fruit, with some ashy peat with a slight medicinal edge and some citrus. It's really just a bloody brilliant 5-year-old whiskey. Their patience in waiting the extra 2 years to get from a 3-year-old release to the 5-year-old release really paid off here. Fantastic stuff, Ardnahoe. I can't wait to try what you're releasing next. Let's talk about blended malts. Last year, the best blended malt award went to the Campbelltown Lock, and deservedly so. It's a fantastic blended malt, but I had far fewer this year than I have had in a number of years. And really weirdly, it was a year that I focused on blended Scotch more than blended malts. However, there is one blended malt that really just like distance itself from the rest of the pack, and that whiskey is actually from a new distillery, oddly enough. It is a blended malt that was designed to reward people who actually visit the distillery visitor center of this new distillery. And this is going to be the CRN 57 degree 30-year-old blended malt. This is bottled at 51.9% ABV, and this is made up from Gordon and MacPhail warehouse stock. And the reason for that is the Kilkerran is Gordon MacPhail's other Speyside distillery that just opened up in 2022. I've heard multiple people tell me that this is one of those distilleries that is a must visit if you're going to Scotland. I went back to check my notes to try and figure out why this whiskey seems to live rent-free in my head. And I checked my notes, and thank you to Hexagonal Crank who gave me a sample generously of this. When I look at my notes, it's saying things like instantly old and dignified sherry. It's saying antique old bookshop, Vellicore, orange marmalade, yuzu citrus, and herbs. And that's just on the nose. And I wrapped up those notes with things like, this is a pour me another in 60 minutes type of dram. I want a full hour to experience and unravel, dig into the complexity of this whiskey. And I did note that this whiskey almost came off to me like a 40 to 42-year-old whiskey as opposed to a 30-year-old whiskey. The last thing in my notes that I wrote was, I am not worthy. It was just a spellbinding whiskey and one I'd love to have my own bottle of. Maybe I just need to book a ticket to the Speyside. As I mentioned in the last category, I almost feel like this was the year of the blended Scotch. And I feel like that's a good thing to give a little more love to this category. I've really enjoyed the Compass Box Extinct Blend series. The Cadenheads Enigma 25-year-old is a really fantastic sherry cask matured blended Scotch that I've enjoyed lots. And there was some great boutique-y blends, but weirdly enough, the whiskey I want to focus on this year actually isn't a Scotch, though it does actually include Scotch in its makeup. And while it might not be the very best blended Scotch I've had, it's probably the most interesting from this year, and that's why it really sticks out to me and I want to highlight it. So it's a little bit of a bending of the rules, but stick with me, guys. I want to talk to you about the Turntable Blending House Collaboration Drop #1 blended whiskey. Now this whiskey is actually made up of 10% Kalila from ex-bourbon casks, single malt, 29% Inchgower single malt from Virgin Oak. It's 22% North British grain from Virgin Oak. And the final component is actually 39% Starward Australian single malt whiskey aged in an ex-Australian red wine cask. I don't own a single Australian whiskey. This is the only thing I own that actually has Australian whiskey in it. And for that reason, it actually really stood out to me as quite unique. And what's best of all is it's actually really delicious. I tried 7 turntable whiskeys this year. I loved the Purple Haze. I really enjoyed the Bittersweet Symphony, but this is the one I purchased because it was just so unique. I get like Twizzlers, Red Vine, Strawberry Campino candies, caramel macchiato, oak, and some distant smoke in this. And really, it actually is fairly viscous once you have it in your mouth. It's really a fantastic little drop, and I'm glad I grabbed a bottle. I love the Enigma 25-year-old blend and all those ones I mentioned earlier too, but I thought I'd shine a little light on the Turntable Blending House for this pick. Final 6 whiskeys on this list, I've actually organized them by Scotch whiskey region, and so I'm going to be talking about them from number 6 to number 1, with the number 1 being my whiskey of the year. Now for number 6, we're going to be going to the Speyside. My best Speyside single malt Scotch whiskey of 2024 is the Tamdhu 18-year-old single malt Speyside Scotch whiskey. It's bottled at 46.8% ABV. It's non-chill filtered, it's natural color, and it is fully matured in Oloroso seasoned sherry casks. Now this is a whiskey that had me right from hello. The sherry maturation on this is done exactly in the right way, and I'm a big fan of Oloroso sherry casks. And if you are too, you should find this very enjoyable. Notes of like espresso, raisin, leather, tobacco, and spice. I really loved this whiskey. It feels like dignified and very enjoyable, rich sherry. I will say that I got my bottle at an exceptional price from Crown Cellars in Calgary, which oftentimes has some of the best prices in my market. However, I don't think I'd be purchasing another bottle at its current price. It feels like there was a few bottles still kicking about, and at that time it looked like it was the best price in the world, honestly, for this bottle. At the current price, which is pushing now $300 Canadian, I don't know if I'm buying another one. So hopefully the prices come down on this Tamdhu 18. If you're looking for an alternative, the Anok 24-year-old was a fantastic alternative, and I would have bought a bottle, except for it sold out in my market basically completely. Tough breaks, but for a sherry influenced whiskey, this is what I'm going for. This is exactly what I'd like. Number 5 on this list, we're going to the Highlands for the best Highland single malt of 2024, which is the Old Pulteney 18-year-old Highland single malt Scotch whiskey. It's 18 years old, 46% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color. The cask makeup is ex-bourbon casks with a finishing period in ex-Oloroso sherry butts. This replaced, controversially I might add, the much loved Old Pulteney 17-year-old, which had a lot of fans. When this happened, there was a price increase and fans were not happy. But this 18-year-old Old Pulteney is a real winner in my books. It shows off a more mature, fully integrity presented Old Pulteney than you get with the 12-year-old, and it really focuses on the Old Pulteney spirit while adding a bit of richness tacked on with those Oloroso sherry butts. I think it's a great example of the maritime malt at a fairly decent price. I got mine on sale for $130 Canadian. That's fantastic. That's a great price in my books. Number 4 on the list is the best Island single malt Scotch whiskey of 2024, which is the Ledaig 18-year-old Island single malt Scotch whiskey. It's bottled at 46.3% ABV. It's non-chill filtered. It's natural color. It's matured in ex-bourbon casks with a 2-year finishing period in ex-sherry casks. Now, this whiskey is basically a whiskey that's achieved a perma-shelf status for me, along with the Ledaig 10-year-old. It's a whiskey I always want to keep around. I did mention it on last year's list, and one of the reasons why it's on this year's list is because I can actually buy a bottle of this now. There has been limited numbers of this whiskey coming to Western Canada in British Columbia and Alberta, which has just made like my year. I'm gonna tell you, it's phenomenal that we finally can have access to this, because that was the one thing we were asking for as fans of this distillery out here in Western Canada, was just get us the Ledaig 18. It is so good. I now feel like I can drink my bottle more confidently because I believe I may one day be able to get a backup. It's a peated whiskey from a distillery I adore. It's a distillery that I visited on the Isle of Mull in Tobermory. It's a fantastic, heavily peated dram, and it's a great way to work around that Isle tax when you don't want to pay the prices that you have to for those heavily peated 18-year-old Isla whiskeys. Ledaig 18-year-old is just a phenomenal single malt. Number 3 on our list is our best Isla single malt Scotch whiskey of 2024. And this is another 18-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey. We've got a real theme going here. This is our 4th 18-year-old whiskey in a row. However, this is our last 18-year-old on this list. And this whiskey, the winner is the bruichladdich 18-year-old Isla single malt Scotch whiskey. This is the 18-year-old Redefine 18. That's the way they've branded this. It's kind of a weird name. However, this was distilled in 2004, bottled in late 2023. It's bottled at 50% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color. That 50% ABV is kind of like one of those bruichladdich hallmarks. The cask maturation on this is primarily ex-bourbon with a bit of sauternes and port casks. This is the return of bruichladdich 18. And it was a bit controversial for some because of the price that it came out at. but this whiskey really gave me the bruichladdich experience I have been craving for so long since the departure of the Laddie 16, which I loved. Amongst other age-stated Laddies, really, this is the first return to age statement bruichladdich releases since the bruichladdich 10, the Laddie 10. So I was happy to see them return to these age statements and to lean more into the ex-bourbon profile as opposed to the sweet wine cast, using the sweet wine cast almost like as an accent as opposed to like the main feature. They've played a lot with wine casts in bruichladdich Renaissance history here, and to me, really leaning into ex-bourbon nature, this is showing confidence in their work to stand up on its own 2 feet, and it's beautiful stuff. This is a gorgeous whiskey, and it's exactly what I hoped the bruichladdich 18 would be. Phenomenal stuff, my favorite whiskey from Islay this year. If you've been counting down the regions here, then you know there's only 2 left, and those would be the Lowlands and Campbelltown. And for number 2 on this list, we're going to the Lowlands. So my best Lowland single malt Scotch whiskey of 2024 is a Daftmill 15-year-old cask strength release. This is a vatting of 28 ex-bourbon barrels, bottled at 55.7% cask strength. It's non-chill filtered, it's natural color, and it's a 2022 release that is somehow still available here from this Fife-based single estate whiskey distillery. This is still available at Kensington Wine Market in Calgary if you're looking for a bottle. But it's phenomenal stuff, really highlighting the barley, the malt sugars, orchard fruits, some waxy character, some grassy notes. It's a bloody brilliant lowland whiskey. Probably my favorite lowland whiskey ever at this point. They used chariot barley harvested in 2004 before this barley was distilled in 2006, the second year of operation for the Daftmill distillery. And whiskeys like this are quickly turning Francis Cuthbert into a bit of a whiskey industry legend. This whiskey's phenomenal, and it's one of the ones I went ahead and backed up by buying a second bottle earlier this year. Daftmill 15-year-old cask strength is my number 2 whiskey of 2024. We've reached number 1 on the list, the whiskey of the year. And I just wanted to thank you guys so much for supporting the channel, for watching the videos, for leaving comments, and in particular, thank you to my Patreon subscribers who've supported me through 2025. 2022 was the first year of whiskey on the West Coast. In that year, my whiskey of the year was the Octomore 10-year-old 3rd edition Islay Single Malt Scotch Whisky, one of my favorite whiskeys ever. Last year, for 2023, I named the 100% ex-bourbon release of the Springbank 12 cask strength my whiskey of the year. Well, if you've been keeping track of what regions we've already covered, you know that my whiskey of the year this year also comes from Campbelltown. So my Campbelltown Single Malt Scotch Whisky of 2024 and my whiskey of the year is a whiskey that Patreon subscribers to the channel will know a little bit about, because I took a part in a blind tasting through Kensington Wine Market earlier in the year. And the whiskey that is my whiskey of the year actually stole the show, sort of, in that tasting. It wasn't the Springbank 10-year-old Palo Cortado release. It wasn't the Hazelburn 21-year-old or the Longrow 21. The whiskey that absolutely came out of that tasting like a champ was the Kilkerran 16-year-old Campbelltown Single Malt Scotch Whisky from the Glengyle distillery. Now that whiskey, that version of the Kilkerran 16-year-old that I tried, that was the 2023 release. Now the 2023 and 2024 release are both bottled at 46% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color, just like everything else J.A. Mitchell does. The cask makeup on these 2 releases is slightly different. Actually, not slightly, it's greatly different. 60% sherry cask, 35% ex-bourbon, and 5% rum cask is the cask maturation on the 2023. The 2024, which is the bottle I have on the table right here, is 70% ex-bourbon, 20% sherry, and 10% rum. So they've reduced the sherry content in favor of ex-bourbon and rum cask influence. Now, I would say the 2023 is just a little bit better than the 2024 release, but I'm very early on into my 2024. I've had a few drams from someone else's bottle, and I've had a glass of my own here. It's finally open. But honestly, with consistent excellence like this at a price of $125 Canadian, this 16-year-old release is slept on way too much in favor of the more obvious Springbank products. Truly, truly, truly amazing stuff from the Glengyle distillery, and thank goodness Thank goodness that the SWA threatened to take away Campbelltown's Scotch Whisky region status, because if that didn't happen, we might not have the Glengyle distillery, and we might not have this beautiful Kilkerran 16-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey. Thank you guys for an excellent year. Thank you for joining me here on the West Coast. I hope to share whiskeys like this with you more in the future. I'm going to work on a review of this for the new year. But until next time, from the West Coast, Sláinte.